Hey Hermits, welcome back to my channel. It's Dara here, and today we are going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the month of June. And I will say we've had some absolute corkers. Let's dive in and we'll do this in order of books read because that is just easiest for me. I'm not a big fan of ranking my books in order just because I find it so hard to compare some things. Like, for example, romances, you can't compare them to thrillers, and thrillers you can't compare them to poetry, and poetry you can't compare to classic. You get what I'm saying. So yeah, we're gonna stick with doing this in the order that I read. So the first book that I finished in the month of June was Rachel's Holiday by Marian Keyes. This was a reread for me, and it was pure joy, pure nostalgia. So if you've never heard of this book, if you've never experienced this book, Rachel's Holiday tells the story of Rachel Walsh, who is living the high life in New York, going out all the time, getting absolutely wasted. And at the very start of the book, she accidentally overdoses. So her roommate calls her dad, and the family sort of go and get her and make her fly from New York back over to Dublin to enter a rehab facility called the Cloisters. And it's really her story of getting sober. And what's really interesting is it's told exclusively from her perspective. So you see her evolution as she goes from thinking that everyone's insane and overreacting and like not letting her live her life to coming to realize that actually she's experiencing addiction. And she doesn't realize that at the beginning. Like, you get to experience the denial with her and the like judgment with her, which is just a really interesting way to tackle the topic, I feel, as somebody who has spent a lot of my life around people who are struggling with addiction. And so having that voice of the person who has been there, who has felt that for themselves, was, yeah, I feel like I learned a lot from reading the book the first time I read it, and there's more obviously every time you read something, but it's all, despite tackling these really hard topics, it's so funny and it's warm and it's witty and it feels comforting. And yeah, the characters are so 3D and delightful, and it's actually part of a series of companion novels, and each of the 5 sisters in the family have their own novel. And Rachel recently got a second one. Again, Rachel recently came out, and I haven't read that yet, but I definitely want to. I highly recommend. I think everyone should read this book, and ignore the fact that it's pink and has flip-flops on the cover. It makes it look very like beachy and chiclety, and that's not it at all. Honestly, the cover designer has done it a massive disservice. The second book that I read in the month of June was This Way Out by Tufail Ahmed. And this is a story of a queer Muslim man living in London, and he has not come out to his family, but he does in this book. And his family, so he's got a big Muslim family that are extremely conservative, and he knows that it is going to cause problems with them. He knows. And when his partner proposes, he decides that now is the time that he is going to be honest with his family. And it has a ripple effect, it does. And I loved the way it was handled. It wasn't like this fluffy quick win sort of, oh, we like, you know, getting a happy ever after where everyone's in sync and everyone's on the same page and everyone's supportive, because that's not real life. When you come from a family who have very entrenched traditional beliefs, it's not that easy, and it's not that seamless to, you know, shake up the status quo. And I loved how that was handled in this book. I also loved the treatment of male mental health and relationships and the complexity of relationships. And, you know, it somehow managed to be lovely and heartwarming despite being difficult in moments. Yeah, enjoyed it. I got it through Amazon First Read, so if you're familiar, anyone with an Amazon Prime account can get a book for free every month. In fact, I actually recently filmed a video where I go through and did some Kindle book shopping and also picked my Amazon First Reads. So if you want to take a look at that, I'll link in the description. But I enjoyed this book. I thought it was good. It was a very quick read. I will say that you could tell that it was a debut. So there were some parts where it felt a little bit clunky and a little bit like you were being told things instead of shown things. But I'm always more forgiving when it's an author's debut. And the next book that I read in the month of June was a poetry collection called Dark Braid by Dara Yen Elarath. And obviously I liked it already because the author shares my name. It's spelled differently, but we share a name, and that's a real rarity for me. I don't see people with my name very often. But I actually really love this collection, and it's, how do I want to describe this? So go with me here. Do you remember True Blood, the TV show? It had like these really like dark, grim, gritty images in the credits of like the fruit rotting and the flowers blossoming, and like, you know what I'm talking about. This poetry collection had those vibes. And yeah, I don't know how else to describe it. So this was written by an Indigenous author, and there's a real connection to the natural world and sort of the degradation of the natural world and the natural disgusting qualities of some aspects of the natural world, while also being like really relatable and meaningful and personal. It's hard to describe. I recommend it. I thought it was great. I have read some real duds in the world of poetry this year, and this was not one of them. This one was really enjoyable. So next I read Gentlemen Prefer Blondes by Anita Loos, and this is, spoiler alert, one of the most disappointing books that I've read this year. And the reason I say spoiler alert is because I talk about it quite extensively during my like mid-year reflections video. So I'm going to link to that and move swiftly on, because I don't want to dwell on how annoyed that book made me, because it did make me annoyed, it really did. Then we have The Charm Offensive by Alison Cochrane, which was delightful. It was a delightful read. I wish I was still reading it. It only took a day, which is sad, but it was so good. So it tells the story of two men who were involved with the production of a Bachelor-esque type of reality TV show. One of them is a producer, and one of them is the lead of the series. So he is like this world's version of The Bachelor. And this producer is sort of helping him because he's very awkward with the women. He's very reluctant to get involved. And we learn as we go through the series that he has like crippling anxiety. He has OCD, he has a whole host of struggles that make it really difficult for him to trust people and relate to people and engage with them. And he doesn't like being touched, and there's just a lot of things that he's dealing with that he hasn't shared with anybody. So nobody knows that's what's going on. They just think he's rude. And so our producer sort of is trying to get him to come out of his shell and to create this love story, because he's a real romantic. And as he does this, they end up falling for each other, and it's just stunning, and I loved it. And beyond just it being a really irresistible romance, we had some stunning representation in terms of mental health, different types of mental health, the way mental health is discussed, diversity in the media. We see a lot of inclusivity in terms of race, but also in terms of sexuality. So there's discussion of like pansexuality, there's discussion of asexuality, there's like discussion of like being gay, being bi, like all different flavors, and it's done in such an organic, seamless way. Like it doesn't feel like you're just being educated, even though you probably kind of are. And I really enjoyed it. I feel like, again, the cover is doing a huge disservice, because I resisted it for ages. I saw the cover and I thought, no fucking way do I want to read that. There's something about an illustrated cover that I find deeply off-putting a lot of the time. I don't know, it just feels like a children's book. And often feels really tacky, and there was just something about the font and the colours, and I was like, ew, no, do not want to read. I cannot tell you how thrilled I am that I decided to pick it up. And I only picked it up because it showed up on Kindle Daily Deals for 99p. And honestly, I would be shocked if this did not make it to my favourites of the year. It was so good. Really, really enjoyed it. The next book I finished in June was Throne of Glass by Sarah J Maas. And I say finished in June because I actually started it in April. I think I started it in April. Yeah, because I started it... Oh no, I started it in March because I started it via audio at the gym. And that was right before I injured my ankle and couldn't go for a while. So yeah. Started in March, finished in June. Enjoyed it. I actually finished the last few chapters with a physical copy from the library. And I will say that I enjoyed the audio experience more. So I think when I continue with the rest of the series, I am going to pick up the audiobook. But for those not in the know, Throne of Glass is the first in a fantasy series about a young woman who has been in like this really awful like slave labor camp kind of prison because she's an assassin. And she's sprung from the prison at the start and brought back to the palace where she's being tasked with competing to be the king's assassin. And so she's trying to compete to be the king's assassin without telling anyone who she is because her name is very famous. All the while, like mysterious things start happening in the palace, people start dying, it's all very brutal, and she has to, like figure out what happened, make sure she survives, make sure she wins the contest, and make sure nobody finds out who she is. And yeah, I enjoyed it, it was fun. Am I going to remember it for the rest of my life? Probably not, but I am going to read the rest of the series, so yeah, pretty good. Then I read Two Girls Down by Louisa Luna because I've really been craving some crime fiction recently. I want to go back to my roots, want to read more crime and thrillers because that used to be my absolute jam, and it's not something that I've picked up a lot of recently. So I definitely scratched the itch with this one, and it's, it's a standard crime story that starts with two girls going missing and someone trying to figure out what happened. And the someone in this case is a bounty hunter whose speciality is finding missing children. And she teams up with this disgraced retired police officer who's now a PI. And yeah, they go about this small town trying to figure out what happened. I enjoyed it. I'll be continuing with the series. I think there are only maybe one or two more in the series so far, but I'll be reading them. Then we have Mr. Loverman by Bernardine Evaristo, which was a breath of fresh air. This was actually my book club pick for the month of May, so I was quite late reading it, but I really enjoyed it. So this tells the story of Barrington Jedediah Walker, also known as Barry, a 74-year-old Antiguan man who lives in London with his wife of, I think, 40 years, and his lover, Morris, who's also his best friend. His wife doesn't know about his lover, obviously. And at the ripe old age of 74, he decides that he wants to leave his wife and, stop living a lie, start just being fully in his relationship with Morris. And it's really about that unfolding. So we have so much packed into this teeny tiny little novel. We have discussions on duty and religion, we have discussions on tradition, we have discussions on privilege, we have discussions on sexuality, on perceptions of like masculine and feminine gender roles. We have all sorts, and like there's something about Barry, he's just so lovable despite being objectively a dick. Like he lied to his wife for 40 years, he has not been faithful, he is an out and out misogynist, and yet you just find yourself rooting for him, you find yourself loving him. What's that about? That is some skilled writing there. And I also loved and this was like probably not supposed to be like a huge part of the story, but his brother, who is not really in it, like he's only mentioned once or twice, but his brother's name was like Larry, Larrington. So the brothers were Barrington and Larrington, and that just really tickled me. As soon as I read that, I just started chuckling. But I really enjoyed the book. I would definitely recommend it. It's told through two perspectives. So we have Barry, current day, 74 years old, what he's going through as he's trying to make this decision and make this big move, and like his worries about the ramifications of that on his family and community. And then we have a story in the past from the perspective of his wife that tells the story of their marriage. So from them meeting to, getting married, the struggles that they've been through, the birth of their daughters, like all of that stuff. So we're seeing these two different perspectives, and I don't want to spoil it, but there are I definitely have some strong opinions about this book. But I don't want to share it because spoilers. But if you read it, feel free to message me on Instagram and we can discuss. The next book that I read in the month of June was Outlander, the first in the series. And this one, I haven't read a book that has taken me this long to read in so long. I think it took me about, 2 weeks. And I know objectively that doesn't sound all of that long, but usually I'm a really quick reader. Usually it's a couple of days max, maybe 4 days. Like that's my maximum usually. And so I felt like the month went really slowly because of that. It's really interesting, but I did love it. I loved the world, I loved the characters. The reason I actually picked it up is because I want to continue with the series, and I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't forgetting anything important. And so I actually annotated it, and my version of annotation is like way more no frills than most of the people that you will see around these parts. I just use a pen or a pencil, no tabs, none. And I feel like I have theories now. I feel like I have theories because I've picked up on a lot more than I did the first time I read it. So excited to dive into book 2. I've actually already started book 2 in the series, and yeah, I'm looking forward to getting even more invested in that world because I do love it. I love Jamie Fraser, and I would marry him tomorrow if given the option. If Dougal Mackenzie wanted to force me to marry Jamie, I would not be starting arguments about it. I'd be like, yes please, okay. Then I read The Lockin by Phoebe Luckhurst, and I actually talked about this in a vlog that I filmed, so you'll be seeing this video before you see the vlog. But I did a 36-hour readathon with some friends, and this is one of the books that I read during that time. So I'm not going to go too extensively into it just because you will see me talk about it a lot more in that vlog. But this is the story of 3 flatmates. So we have 2 girls who have been best friends through university and were like currently 10 years past that point, and they're like slightly odd male housemate. And one Saturday morning, everyone's really hungover and there's a leak in the kitchen. So they're like looking for the stopcock. One of the girls and the male flatmate are in the attic for some reason looking for it up there, and the other one like finds it downstairs, and she runs up and she's like, hey, it's downstairs but I need someone to help me turn it. And while they're in the attic, the guy that the second housemate slept with last night comes upstairs and it's like, oh, has anyone got an iPhone charger? Apple people honestly causing all the problems. And then he accidentally, the door blows shut because the window's open, and then he goes to open it to go and get the charger and pulls the handle off, and they're stuck in the attic with the kitchen flooding downstairs. And only one of them has a phone, but he has no signal, at least to start with. And yeah, they're stranded. And then we find out that the first housemate actually has like a romantic history with the guy her friend just slept with, and it's really tense and dramatic and all of this stuff, and we're just like unraveling the different relationships, and it's like funny, it's amusing, it's nostalgic. And the weird housemate then ends up being able to get online, so he just, instead of getting help, decides to start live tweeting what is going on in the attic. And so obviously there's someone like peeing in a bucket in the corner, and there's like reminiscing about this like past relationship, even though the guy is adamant that it never happened, whereas she is convinced that it does. And there's just some very specific nostalgic stuff that happened that really spoke to me, like remembering the days of MSN Messenger, that kind of vibe. All in all, really enjoyable, really quick read, really easy read, very summary. Not an all-time favourite, but I'm glad I read it. And then the other book that I read during that readathon, also the last book that I read in the month of June, was More Than You'll Ever Know by Katie Gutierrez. And this was stunning. I loved it, loved it, loved it. I keep describing this as Evelyn Hugo, but make it true crime. And that feels so accurate because that's exactly what it is. We have a woman who is a true crime writer, and she decides that she wants to write a book about this sensational case that happened in the early 80s and centers around a woman called Dolores who has never given an interview. So she tracks this woman down, convinces her to work on this book with her, and then we're seeing both of their stories. So we're getting the modern day drama of the true crime writer who has all of her own issues and relationship malarkey to deal with, and then we have Dolores' story, and we're learning about her two husbands that she had at the same time and how her relationships with the two of them led to one of them murdering the other and getting put in prison for it. And so it's just a wild time, as I'm sure you can imagine. I loved it. I was gripped. The writing was impeccable. The social commentary was pristine. The discussions on like motherhood and just everything. Could not fault it. Could not fault it. Highly recommend. Highly recommend. So I feel like I really finished the month on a massive high, which is always a great feeling, and I just want to sustain that as we move into July. So putting those good vibes out there. I would love to hear from you in the comments. What was your favourite book of June? Let me know. And if you convince me in the comments, I will add it to my wish list. How's that for a deal? Anyway, I'm going to love you and leave you. So go have a fabulous rest of your day, and I will catch you in my next upload.